So there we go. All right, now that that's taken care of, let's get into the good stuff. All right, so I know we have a lot of Best Buddies Masters on this call, but for those that may not be as aware, I'll briefly describe what we do. So as I mentioned before, I oversee our jobs program in Los Angeles and Orange County, which is an employment program where we assist highly qualified individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to gain competitive employment at diverse, forward-thinking, and inclusive employers. We then also have a friendship program. And for many people with IDD, making connections with others can be challenging, especially due to the history of social isolation of people with IDD due to unjust stigmas. So we help facilitate one-to-one friendships in friendship chapters, as we call them. And it's kind of like a school club. So from elementary school through college and beyond. So some of our buddy pairs have been in lasting friendships for close to 30 years. So it's pretty amazing. We also have been able to expand past school chapters and have developed a program called Citizens, where similarly adults with and without IDD are matched in one-to-one friendships. And this is as a way to develop, meaningful friendships and become more involved in local communities. And finally, we have eBuddies, which is a program that rings true to the world that we're currently living in. It's everything that I've said about our friendship program, but online. So never really having to leave the couch. It's like a pen pal, but via email. We then have our leadership development program, or our ambassador program, where we educate individuals with and without disabilities to be leaders, public speakers, and advocates.
Yeah.
And finally, our last pillar is our inclusive living program.
It's updating. Yes.
On mute. Okay. And the inclusive living program is where we provide integrated living for people with and without disabilities. So now the purpose of today's webinar is to share information about the process for voting and voting accessibility for people with disabilities in California specifically. So this discussion will not be about specific candidates, propositions, beliefs, or issues, but about the process of voting in general. The structure of the webinar will be a question and answer style, and I have two lovely guest speakers that I promise I'm going to turn it over soon to kick off the event. But prior to this call, Best Buddies staff across California connected with their participants and asked what kind of questions they have surrounding voting. So those will be the questions that are being asked and answered today during the first portion of our webinar. And then once those are completed, we will open up the floor to all of you for any questions that you may have. I will be monitoring the chat while the question and answer is occurring, and I'll try to answer to the best of my ability, but if I cannot, I'll make a note of what you asked and make sure to ask once the Q&A session is over. So without further ado, I'm going to pass things off to Sam and then to Paul for their own introductions.
Hi, how are you all? My name is Sam Hersch. I've been a Best Buddies participant for a little bit over a year now, but I've been familiar with Best Buddies for the last 12 years. I've lived in California for the past 22 years, grew up mostly in Northern California until I transitioned to or relocated to Southern California, where I attended Santa Monica College, where I earned a degree in liberal arts and humanities, and UCLA, where I earned a degree in classics. And I will hopefully, God willing, be returning to UCLA for a master's degree in student affairs. As I said, my major was classics, so I spent a good majority of my time in the classroom studying the origins of democracies and republics, and it's been aware to me in the last few years that voting is an essential part of our civic duty, and making ourselves aware of how we vote and why we vote is as important as the act of voting itself. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my co-host, Paul Spencer, who is an attorney and expert on the subject.
So, hi everyone, thanks for for having me out to speak with you. So I'm Paul. I am an attorney with Disability Rights California in our voting rights practice group. So Disability Rights California is the state protection and advocacy system for people with disabilities. And, we help people in a wide variety of areas, but one of them is voting. We want to make sure that voting is accessible across the entire state. My colleagues and I, we work to make sure that the laws are being followed, and that if there's things that need to be better, that we make them happen. And that could be with suing the state government to get some change, or it could be sponsoring legislation to get new state laws that we think are better for people with disabilities is when it comes to voting. And we do a lot of education and outreach too. Like we actually want to talk to voters with disabilities and give you the information you need to vote. And also just to let you know that voting is accessible in California. So disability is not a barrier to voting. It's not a barrier to voter registration, to voting in person or voting by mail. There's a lot of options you have in California. Typically, even nationwide, voting is accessible for people with disabilities. But California, we have some pretty good rules on the books, which just also are better for people with disabilities and keep the things accessible. That's one thing we're going to go over in this. We're going to talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of how to vote in California, but kind of the big takeaway I want you to have is to realize that voting is accessible if you're someone with a disability. The entire process should be accessible. But part of that, I think, is kind of understanding at least the basics of what the rules are, so you can advocate for yourself too if you run into a barrier. And also, not necessarily advocating or overcoming barriers. I want you to be confident when you go vote that it's going to be accessible, that your vote's going to count, and that it's going to be relatively easy to do. So I think that should be the big takeaway from this call. And there's lots of resources for information. I run a voting hotline for people with disabilities. If you ran into some barrier, you're welcome to call us and we'll help you resolve it. But I also want to point out there's a lot of resources out there too that can help you vote, make informed decisions about how to vote, and figure out how and when and where you want to vote.
Wonderful. Thank you. Alrighty. Well, now, Sam, you can take it away.
Well, we have put together a general questionnaire of questions that you sent in. And this questionnaire should give you a general idea of voting practices in the state. Assuming we're all registered, are we? But how can you check if you're registered or not, Paul?
So it's really easy to do. If you're not sure if you're registered to vote, or you can't remember, or if you moved, it's really easy to check online on the California Secretary of State's website. There is a voter lookup tool where you can look yourself up to make sure that you're registered. You can also look yourself up on a lot of county websites. So the county elections website have voter lookup tools as well. And the reason for that is the elections in California are actually run by the local county governments. So it's the county. So it's sort of important what county you live in, because that's who you're going to contact if you have questions. So you could always call the county elections office and ask them to look up your voter registration. But I think the easiest way to do it is to go online on the California Secretary of State's website and put in your information and make sure you're registered.
And what vital information would you need to confirm?
So typically you're going to need your name, the last four of your social security number, and either your driver's license or state ID card. And that's how you look yourself up, and your birthday. So yeah, that's it. It's pretty easy, hopefully.
I hope so. I hope it has been for everyone as well. What is the deadline to be registered? Because I know many.
Oh, so this is kind of a tough one. So the deadline was on Monday the 19th, to be registered.
Monday.
However, if you miss the deadline, you can still register to vote. You just have to do it in person. So you'd have to register in person at your county elections office or at a polling location or a vote center. So your county elections offices are open now, and they could do a voter registration. The problem is, registering in person is a little harder this year because of COVID and getting around. So My point is that if you miss the voter registration deadline, you can still register to vote. You just have to go do it in person.
Okay.
But that's not going to stop you from looking yourself up to make sure that your registration's up to date. Also, like if you moved, you can still change your address online. You can update your voter registration. And that's important for this election is you want to make sure that they have the right address on file because everyone is getting a vote by mail ballot automatically. So you want to make sure you got the right address.
Well, since you have made us aware of the nature of your work, do you know anything about the history and when exactly people with disabilities were first able to vote?
So the exact date is a little tough, and it hasn't necessarily been that people with disabilities can't vote or that it was illegal for them to vote. But, it wasn't until 40, 50 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, there were new federal laws that made voting accessible for people with disabilities. So I mean, rather than thinking about, when were people with disabilities given the right to vote, there's not necessarily a clear date like there is for women or voters at the age of 18 like there are with other amendments. So, but instead there's some other federal laws like the voting accessibility for the elderly and handicapped act. We don't really say handicapped anymore, but that's what this law was called in 1984. This law guaranteed that polling places are required to be physically accessible. So think about that. Up until that point, polling places where you would go didn't have to be accessible. So I mean it's a big deal. And then there's also the Americans with Disabilities Act, which also helps to make voting accessible. But another good federal law is the Help America Vote Act, which requires that there's accessible voting machines in every polling location for elections. So, but the big takeaway here kind of is from these federal laws is when you go to a polling location, it's going to be physically accessible, and there's also going to be an accessible computer in there. And what the accessible computer does is it's basically like an iPad that displays your ballot electronically, and then it has accessible tech plugins like audio. It has a button keypad, so it makes it accessible for a variety of disabilities. And the reason that's important is, let's say you are unable to grasp a pen, so you can't fill out a traditional paper ballot. That accessible computer allows you to fill out the ballot by yourself. And voting privately and independently is a big deal. Like, you can have someone help you fill out a ballot, but ideally you could fill out your ballot without having to tell the poll workers helping you fill it out how to vote. So that's what's great about the accessible voting equipment is it allows you to vote privately and independently. And that's probably the other big takeaway I'd like you to have when you leave is that if you're a voter with a disability, you're not only is voting going to be accessible, but you should be able to do it privately and independently without having to reveal to someone how you voted.
Right. What about can anyone that has a disability vote currently?
Generally, yes. The easy answer is yes. For the most part, disability is not a barrier to voting. There's one thing we got to talk about just for the voter registration requirements. So if anyone wants to help me out, can anyone tell me? So there's 5 requirements to be a registered voter. Does anyone know one? Want to throw one out there?
Birthday.
Birthday's good. Yeah. So how old do you have to be to vote?
18 years old.
Okay, we got one. You got to be 18. What's another one?
You got to be registered in a party, right, Paul?
You don't have to be registered to be eligible, and you don't have to pick a party. So we got one. Can we get another one? And then anybody? I'll give you a hint. It matters where you live.
You had to live in the county to register for that certain county, or actually, I think it goes by state.
No, Larry, you got that right. Yeah, you've got to be a resident of California, and you need to live where you're going to vote. So you need to live in the county. Say a resident of California. All right, so I'll do the rest. So you got to be a U.S. citizen is one to vote. You can't currently be in prison or on parole. which is an easy one, because if you're not in prison and you're not on parole, you're eligible in California. So unlike other states, you're not, if you have a felony conviction, it doesn't bar you from voting once you finish prison or on parole. And then the last requirement to be a registered voter, and this is answering your disability question, Sam, in sort of a meandering way. You only would lose the right to vote maybe as a person with a disability if you're under conservatorship. So if you're under conservatorship, and that's basically what, a court establishes someone to be your guardian, takes care of money and finances. The court also makes a determination about whether or not you're eligible to vote. So the standard is pretty voter friendly, and here's the standard is, you'd only lose the right to vote if you were unable to communicate a desire to vote with reasonable accommodations. So that's a pretty voter friendly standard. So, if you have an interest in voting, if you have opinions about politics, if you like watching CNN and then talking about who you want to vote, you're eligible to vote. So the judge likely didn't take it away. If by chance, you are under conservatorship and you have questions, DRC on our website, we have a toolkit for voters under conservatorship. And you're also welcome to call our hotline if you have questions. But generally, you're eligible to vote unless you're under conservatorship and the judge took away the right to vote. And this is the last thing I'd point on it is, if you are under conservatorship, it's not your conservator, typically your parent or a family member. It's not their decision about whether or not you vote. It's the judge's decision. So that's just something else to think about. It's up to the judge whether or not you get to vote, not up to the guardian. And if you've lost the right to vote, we can help you get it back if you're curious.
Good to know. You mentioned the word communicate. I am aware that there are individuals with disabilities that use communication devices to communicate. I knew one of them growing up, and we all know that Stephen Hawking had one.
Yeah, he's got probably the most famous person that used one. So yes, if you use a communication device, that would fall under the reasonable accommodations umbrella. So, you're definitely communicating a desire to vote. If you're using any type of software or accessible tech to help communicate. So, and I mean, even if you were handwriting what your desire to vote, that would count too. So, or if you're like Stephen Hawking and you've got I heard that didn't he have to do something because he was losing his voice, so he had to get someone to re-record it. So anyway, it's with reasonable accommodation. So, and again, it's a pretty voter-friendly standard. So it's a best practice nationwide. If you have a desire to vote, you're going to meet the eligibility requirements.
Right. You hinted at conservatorship earlier. I am aware that I am independent and I'm capable of thinking independently and also thinking critically. And I'm aware that many people with disabilities across this nation may not be as cognitively functioning. So how can we, as a united community, make sure that people with disabilities who might be more limited in the ability to function cognitively are not manipulated to vote a certain way by their parents or conservators or anyone else?
I can go.
Sure, Max.
Oh, Max, we're actually gonna. Oh, if you want to answer, but then
Okay.
we're gonna bring it back to Paul.
Okay. I'm Paul. I'm Max, by the way.
Hi, Max.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So what should I say? Oh yes, I did my mail-in ballot. I know I've been following the news about Biden and versus Trump lately, and that Biden's leading in most swing states, and that in the last months I've contributed to Joe in his
Hey,
campaign.
Max, we're not talking about politics. I love talking about voting though, but
Voting.
let's try to keep it nonpartisan if you
Yeah.
can. Yeah, no
Yeah.
pressure. But you voted. You already mailed in your ballot.
I did mail in my ballot, but because I didn't want to have to deal with waiting in line.
I gotcha. And were you able to fill it out on your own and it went
My
well?
dad helped me actually.
Okay. And then, so I mean, he didn't try to sway your opinion, did he? Did he just Did he vote how you told him to vote?
Well, he just wanted me to pick the right people because he was concerned I was going to make mistakes on the
Okay.
mail-in ballot.
So Max, let me tell you what the rule is there, okay?
Okay.
It's totally okay for someone to assist you with your ballot.
Yeah.
That is legal for someone to help you fill out the ballot. But ideally, I mean, this is what we want. If someone's going to help you fill out your vote by mail ballot, that you are the one making the decisions and that they're not influencing how you vote. You can ask them questions and, you know, they're welcome to give their opinion, but what's important is that it's how the ballot is voted is the desire of how you want to vote.
Right.
So that's what's important there. And I mean, that's the rule in the state. So I want everyone to know, you can have someone help you fill out your vote by mail ballot at home. You can even bring people with you to the voting booth to help you fill out the ballot if you need assistance. But ideally, you know, we'd like you to vote privately and independently, so you don't have to reveal your choices. So Max, it's totally fine if your dad helped you fill out the ballot, but you know, you want to make sure that that you are the one voting, and
Right.
and not someone else. So I mean, that's what we advise people is you want to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. I dropped it by mail because I didn't want to deal with waiting in long lines like this.
Yeah, that's smart. So I mean, that's definitely what we're advising folks is to vote early,
Right.
but at the same time, you know, if you are a person with a disability, we want you to be able to go vote in person. If that's how you're going to be able to vote accessibly, like if you need the accessible voting machine.
Huh.
But you know, if you are able to, you might really like you did, Max, is to vote early and mail that ballot in now. And you know,
And now I'm all voted. I'm set to go.
yeah, you're done. And did you have a sticker in your package?
I did.
They
I put
they
it
did, yeah.
on a Best Buddies cup.
Nice. Okay, I have mine included a sticker too, which is
You
nice.
did?
So,
Can we see what it looks like?
give me a second and I'll pull it
Okay.
out. But if Sam
All
wants
right.
to go to the next question, I will find my
I'll
sticker.
let you
But
keep doing the talking, Paul.
I have it in a. I don't know if I can find it. It's Oh wait. Maybe. Oh, here we go. Oh, there it is. You can see it there.
Wow.
It's got 4 languages. San Diego's
I
is pretty
voted.
cool. Yeah. Turn it all the way over. so yeah. Anyway, and you know, elections cost money, everybody. So like, you know, it costs the county, you know, if you're sending out 1 million of these ballots, you know, you've got to pay for 1 million of those stickers. It ends up being quite a bit of money.
Wow.
I think the sticker is worth the money because people really like them. You can show your civic participation and that you voted. I think it's money well spent. And, you know, as a voter, you might want to support things like that. Also, Max, did you have to put a stamp on your envelope?
No, I didn't have to.
Yeah, because it's prepaid. So that's something not to forget. That's new in California. Right now, you don't have to put a stamp on your envelope.
Oh, good. That's good to hear.
Yeah. And then I think a little later, we'll talk more about the logistics of vote by mail, how you want to get it in, and some pitfalls you might want to watch out for.
Yeah,
Max.
that's right. No problem, Paul.
Max.
You're welcome, Samantha.
Okay, Paul. You mentioned several times about the accessibility of voting places and the COVID pandemic is certainly of utmost concern to a lot of us right now. How is voting going to look different aside from the fact that everyone in the state is being given a mail-in ballot automatically because of COVID-19?
Yeah, so I mean that's one of the big changes is, you know, everybody's getting a vote by mail ballot, which is good. The other thing that's important is we're still going to have in-person voting in California in every county in the state. So, and why is that important? Because that's in-person voting is accessible for people with disabilities. It's a place you can go if you've lost your vote by mail ballot, or if you're a limited English proficiency voter. You know, there's people that can help you in language. So it's really important to have in-person voting. But the thing is, how do you make in-person voting safe with COVID? So there are some new protocols in place for November. So I want the takeaway here to be that if you do go vote in person, it's going to be safe. People are going to be wearing masks. Things are going to be socially distanced. And generally, they're using larger locations in most counties to help with social distancing. So after the March primary, like when the pandemic was starting up, the Secretary of State, who's the state official that oversees elections in California, they convened a working group of voting rights advocates, election officials, professors, you name it. And we all kind of argued on the phone for about a month and thought really hard about what safe in-person voting would look like. And I really like the guidelines that came out of that. The secretary, they're on the internet, but even if you don't want to read those guidelines, they're being implemented in the county in a way that we like as disability advocates. So I want you to feel safe if you go vote in person. You might want to consider voting by mail though, just to stay at home. But if you do go vote in person, you need to wear a mask. If for some reason you're a person with a disability that can't wear a mask for a disability reason, there are some exceptions. You don't have to wear a mask there, but generally most people are going to be wearing masks. Things are going to be sanitized. Even the accessible voting equipment, they have specific brands of cleaner they're going to use on the screen. So it should be safe, Sam. And we're pretty happy with how the regulations and planning are looking. And then also to answer how is voting going to look in each county, it's going to depend on where you live. So in Los Angeles County, they're doing 10 and 4-day vote centers. So 10 days before the election, there's these vote centers. You can go to any vote center in the county. They're going to have about 600 or 700 vote centers, which sounds like a lot, but LA, there's a lot of voters and it's a huge county. Where I live in San Diego, we are having what are called super consolidated polling locations. So basically, instead of having 10 polling locations, we're going to have one big one. So the bad news is my neighborhood polling location's gone. So that's bad if you're a person with a disability and you use public transportation. But the good news is that the locations are bigger and they're open for more days. And then in about 15 to 20 counties, they're just going to do traditional elections. So your normal polling location is going to be what's open. So that's kind of the spectrum. Some counties are doing vote centers. Some are they're consolidating their polling locations. And then some counties are just doing traditional elections. And if you're curious what your county looks like, you're going to want to check out your county elections website and also check out your vote by mail ballot. It should have had information on voting in person. And then the other thing is you can drop off your ballot at a drop-off box, or you can take your ballots back to voting locations. So like Max, it's great that he mailed it in because he's got lots of time. But I mean, imagine if Max had finished his ballot on November 3rd. You could mail it and get it postmarked in time, but it's probably safer at that point to go drop it off at a drop box or take it in person to a polling location and hand it over. So that in a nutshell is how voting is going to look in November. But
Yep.
The big takeaway is I want you to know it's going to be safe and accessible.
Right. Now, just to make the transition from voting generally to voting by mail, which is what the majority of these questions I have written down are about, something just came to mind, and it's somewhat of a legal question, but how do we make sure that we don't vote twice? That we've already voted by mail and we're planning to vote in person, or how do we make sure that voting in person is the only alternative for us if we've lost our mail-in ballots or whatever else?
So, I mean, the first thing is you want to make sure that you only vote once because you're only allowed to vote once. But if by chance, let's say you mailed your ballot in, but you forgot, and then you went to go check into the polling location, you're not supposed to do that, but there are safeguards in place. So when they look you up to check you in as a voter in person, they would see that you've already submitted a vote by mail ballot. And then I'm sure some of you are like, but what about the scenario where you mail it and then immediately you forget, you go vote in person? So in that scenario, if you voted at the polling location, that's the vote that's going to count, and your vote by mail ballot's not going to count. You're not supposed to do that. But if you did forget, or there was some disability related reason that happened, that would likely be forgivable and you wouldn't get in trouble. But you really want to be sure that you're not voting twice. And I also want you to know there's no reason to vote twice. Like whichever method you use, it's going to be counted properly, and it's probably going to be tabulated by your county election officials. There's really good safeguards in place. They do a good job. And then the last thing, if you really want to be sure that that they got your ballot and that they counted it, is you can sign up for what's called ballot tracks. So it's BALLOTTRAX, and it's a service through the Secretary of State's website. it's basically like, you know, when you order an Amazon Prime package and you get the alert that your package has been shipped, and then you get the alert that it's at your door. It's really similar to that. So you get alerts either by text or email that says, you know, your ballot has been received, and then your ballot has been opened and processed. The other good thing about that is it gives you a message. For example, if you're, for some reason you forgot to sign your envelope, it'll let you know, and then you'll have an opportunity to get your signature into the elections office in time so your ballot counts. Oh, somebody just threw the link in there. I don't know if that was Samantha, but that's Ballot Tracks. I signed up for it. It's pretty cool. And I got an email this morning from a voter with a disability who's blind who really liked Ballot Tracks too. So I think it's the accessibility of it is quite good too.
I can speak to its efficacy.
Oh, cool! Did you sign up for it too, Sam? Yeah, it did.
Yep.
Yeah, it works. You know, so it's good. It's nice when there's new innovative stuff in elections. It's cool to see.
Well, great. Now, if all we can do is vote in person, you did mention super consolidated voting places, which sound like a comic book lair to me.
Yeah.
Are the polls providing specialized hours for people with disabilities to go vote, like grocery stores are doing?
You know, unfortunately, there's not like shopping, or there's not special hours for people with disabilities, but the super consolidated polling places are open for more days. So they're not just open on election day, they're open Saturday on Halloween, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday for 8 hours on those days, and then 13 hours on election day. So there's a lot of hours to vote. But I will say, Sam, the names are pretty bad generally in elections. So kind of struggle coming up with cool names and kind of end up with weird comic book sounding super consolidated polling places, which don't really roll off the tongue very well. So you're right there.
Well, assuming that the best, most effective option is to vote by mail, speak to each of the following statements or questions. Is it better to mail it in or drop it off in a ballot box?
You know, it's not that one's better than the other, but you need to make sure that it gets there in time. So the rules are, you need to either drop it off on November 3rd, or if you're mailing it in, it has to be postmarked on November 3rd. So like, how could that go wrong? Like, what could you mess up there? Let's say you put it in your mailbox at 6 o'clock on Tuesday night, election day. That mail's not going to get picked up till the next day, so it's not going to be postmarked in time. So in that scenario, you probably want to drop it off. So how about this, Sam, for just a rule of thumb is, if there's more than a week to go before the election, so like up until Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, it's fine to mail your ballot back. But after that, you might want to go drop it off in person. And the reason for that is, you know, and if you've seen the news, there's been a lot of news reports that the Postal Service is delayed and things are backed up. Most likely, if you mail it 3 days before the election, it's going to get postmarked in time and it's going to get received by the elections office. But just to be on the safe side, you might want to drop it off in person. The other thing, so it's got to be postmarked or before election day. However, if you mail it, as long as it's postmarked by election day, it has up to 17 days to be received by the election office. They've extended that time frame. So, I mean, if you mail it from anywhere in California, it's going to get to the county elections office within 17 days, even with delays in the Postal Service. But again, kind of the bottleneck, scary thing there is that if your ballot doesn't get postmark stamped on election day, that could be bad. So you definitely want to drop it off on that day, unless you're really sure the mailman got it. And one thing you could be sure is you could take your ballot to the post office, take it up to the counter and ask them to hand stamp it right there, and they will with that day's postmark.
And everybody can identify a postmark. It's that red circular stamp.
The like blurry stamp that's in the upper right-hand corner of letters. Not that we really even get that much mail anymore. That's what else is weird about vote by mail. Is like, how many people own a book of stamps right now? Anybody? Okay, we got 3, 4. Okay, yeah, 4. Okay, 4 people. I mean, I don't know about, I have some stamps right now, but like, I don't even always own stamps. So the whole mail can be a little tough and weird, you know? So we're just not mailing stuff as much as we used to. So just it is nice that we're paying for postage in California. That's great.
Okay, speaking of not receiving letters and mailing stuff, so what if you don't receive voter information about the ballots in the mail or direct mailing about each of the candidates or anything else, but ballots in particular?
So at this point, if you're an active registered voter, you should have gotten your ballot in the mail. So if you haven't gotten it in the mail, you're going to want to look yourself up on the Secretary of State's website and make sure your voter registration information is up to date. And then you're probably going to want to call your county elections office and tell them you need your ballot. So at this point, you probably should have received your ballot mail. I got mine 2 weeks ago, and I received my voter information guide in the mail, and I've been getting a ton of junk mail from candidates. So, if you haven't gotten any mail and not just a registered voter, but you have voted recently, so you voted the March primary, or you can voted recently in an election that you remember, that's what makes you an active voter. But anyway, bottom line, if you don't have your vote by mail ballot now at this point, you need to make sure your information is up to date online and call your county elections office and say, hey, what's going on? I need my ballot.
Is there a need then to panic, or what are the steps we should take if we haven't received our ballots?
I don't think you need to panic yet, but I mean, if this was a week from now, that you're cutting it really close to get one in time, but you still have time at this point. You should, if you follow up with your county elections office, hopefully tomorrow morning, you should receive it by mail in time. If, Sam, you were in that scenario, you asked for the ballot and it didn't come in time, at that point you could still go vote in person. But you don't want to find yourself in that position where you're scrambling to make plans to go vote in person on election day, especially with the pandemic. Transportation's a little weird right now. So ideally you can get that vote by mail ballot.
Well, how do we authenticate a ballot? What do I do if one of the pages is missing?
So if you think a page is missing, you're going to want to contact your county elections office too and get them to issue you a new ballot. One thing to note though is if you're an LA voter, the ballot, the presidential race is not listed at the top like it normally is. So go through they put it at the end. The idea is it'll help encourage people to vote the entire ballot. But if you're missing a page or something looks off, you need to contact your county elections office, and they should be able to help you resolve it.
What if I make a mistake on the ballot?
What if you make a mistake on your ballot? And we get this call to our hotline all the time. There's a race for a candidate, and you're supposed to pick one candidate, but you accidentally fill in both bubbles. So you voted for two candidates when you're only supposed to vote for one. What happens? So if you just left it and you voted the rest of the ballot, the county elections office is going to count everything else you voted for. They're just not going to count that race. So you have two options to fix that, okay? One is you could call the county and get them to issue you a new ballot. It's called a spoiled ballot because you messed up. They'll cancel the original ballot they sent you and they'll give you a new ballot. The other option you can do is the county election office will tell you this, is you can X out the one you didn't want to vote for and put an arrow that says, I wanted to vote for this one. So the computer won't see that. But when the computer scans the ballot and realizes there's what's called an overvote, it'll trigger a human review. So a human's going to look at the ballot and then they'll see your arrow. You got to be kind of trusting about that because you got to have the computer catch it and then the humans see your arrow. So you might want to order a new ballot, but if it's at the last minute, we'll often call county elections offices on behalf of voters with disabilities, and that's the advice they give. They're most likely, if you draw the arrow and you're like, not this one, they should be able to figure it out. But if you have time, you might want to go ahead and just get a new ballot.
Okay, this is a somewhat personal question leading into my next question on this question.
Okay.
This is the pen that I used to vote. It's somewhat leaky.
Black?
Yeah.
Black and makes a good bubble?
Completely black. But there were several ink spots that leaked onto the back of the ballot, nowhere near where I was planning to vote. But can the computer tell the difference between an ink spot and someone consciously filling in?
Yeah, and typically the ballot, it doesn't have there's not a risk that if it bleeds through, you're going to vote for somebody else on the underside. Like they're intentional how they've lined up the ballot races on the ballot, but bleeding shouldn't affect it. But you do want to make sure you fully filled in those bubbles.
Right. Any other specific tips that we should know to make sure that our ballots don't get disqualified?
I think it's time to replace your favorite pen, Sam. Yeah, that thing looks like it's bleeding ink everywhere. Yeah. So, I mean, the other tips is to be neat, fill in the bubble completely. This is one that people mess up, is you got to make sure that you actually put your ballot back in the envelope when you mail it back in. And you're required to sign your envelope. So, and let's see if I have my envelope here. So why do you sign your envelope? So this is it's state law. You're required to sign. So this is my envelope. So here's the signature line. You're required to sign your vote by mail envelope, which, it's a state law requirement. You're supposed to sign it, and then the county actually checks all those signatures. So what I'm getting at here is you need to remember to sign it, and also your signature needs to look like the other ones they have on file for you. So the easy way to do this is look at your state ID or your driver's license. That signature that's on your license is likely the same signature they have on file. So as long as your signature on your vote by mail envelope looks pretty similar, you're going to be fine. It doesn't have to be an exact match. It just has to be pretty close. If for some reason it doesn't match, they'll send you a letter saying you need to fix your signature. And also, if you signed up for ballot tracks, you'll get a message that says your signature was wrong. Another thing, just for people with disabilities, if you have a disability that affects your signature, you can sign with an X, and then you can have someone witness your signature, and that will count too. So we have some toolkits on our website that explain those rules, and you're also welcome to call the hotline. We get hotline calls from someone said, hey, I had a stroke, or I have Alzheimer's, or I broke my writing hand. My signature is different this year. What happens? So most likely your signature is going to count. You just need to follow the procedures on the envelope. And then, like I said, with ballot tracks, if for some reason it didn't match or it got flagged, you're going to get notified, and you should have an opportunity to fix it so that your vote counts in time. But that's the big pitfall, is you got to make sure you remember to sign your envelope. And the other big one is to actually put your ballot inside the envelope.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure we've all done that.
I haven't done that one, but I'm pretty good at forgetting to seal envelopes, but I guess you don't have to remember to put the stamp on. But there is information. And look, I'll admit, the instructions on the envelopes, they're confusing. So, if you're confused by it, it's normal. But, really try to follow the instructions and make sure you remember to sign. So, yeah, if I had a legal magic wand, I might change the envelope requirements to make them a little easier to understand, especially since we've been getting tons of hotline calls from voters with disabilities from people that are confused about the signature requirements, and I think a lot of that has to do with the envelopes themselves are confusing, even to someone that does election law. I'm like, it's probably might have done the envelopes a little differently, and they vary from county to county. And
franks or stamps don't count if you stamped your signature.
Oh yeah. So yes, a signature stamp, it counts, but you need to have that signature stamp on file. So, if you use that signature stamp at the DMV, then it would be on file there. Otherwise, you need to make sure the county elections office has your signature stamp on file. One way to do that is with an old school paper voter registration card. You actually do a wet signature with that. So you could have used your signature stamp on that. They'd have it on file. But otherwise, you're going to need to get that signature stamp signature. Somehow that your county elections office has that on file. But yeah, signature stamp is a good way to go too.
As long as they have it on file.
As long as they have it on file.
We come to our final question of the seminar for this questionnaire. How can we, if we're involved in a school or a day program, how can we make sure that people with disabilities get out to vote, and how can we make sure that we help as many people with disabilities get their voices heard as we can?
I think doing some self-advocacy with friends and your colleagues is the way to go. Encourage other people to vote, answer questions for friends, remind people that what the election deadlines are, I think is really helpful. You can also get involved in your community too. So about half the counties in California have what are called voting accessibility advisory committees. If you're really interested in voting, you can join these committees. You literally get to sit around the table with your county election officials and talk about ways that you could make the elections better. That's one way. Another way is, you could volunteer on a political campaign. You could get a job in a politician's office once they get elected as one of their field representatives. There's a person with a disability that was working for a San Diego politician who would often come and speak at voting presentations I did. So he ended up with a really cool job for a while working for a politician. So my point is, it's not just voting. You can kind of get involved in the whole thing. And you can even run for office yourself. It's just, it's the whole ecosystem we want you to be involved in, not just, voting every 4 years for the president. It's voting in every election. And the other thing about being a registered voter is, and someone that votes consistently, is local politicians know that you're a voter and they want your vote. So they care about your opinions and what you think about things. So I think being a consistent voter is important, making voting a habit, and empowering your friends and family members to vote too, I think is also helpful. So in some ways, Sam, it's to really start small. It's to start with your immediate social network. I don't think you need to put things out on social media or do media interviews, even though I'm doing an interview right now. But I think starting small is a really effective way to go.
Sure. Well, I will just echo that in saying that in ancient Greece, in ancient Athens in particular, voting was limited to 500 men every year. 500 men that weren't slaves every year. So just think about how far we've come in the last 2,500 years. And by the way, all those men were randomly selected from a sizable Athenian population. And just think about how far we've come in the last 2,500 years that we're all at least able to vote and voice our opinions.
Yeah, and we've come really far in U.S. history as far as expanding voting to everyone. So it took a long time. So we're there. There's still some obstacles in the way, but in California, there's a lot less of these obstacles. So I want you to know that voting is going to be safe and accessible for you in California.
Sure. And it's best to stay informed and active and civically aware. I would like to ask a question. It isn't my question, but my sister happens to be on this hotline. She is curious if there's a national hotline for voters in Colorado to do the same thing. She's based in Denver.
I don't know if there's a hotline in Colorado, but I'll check, Sam. I'll shoot you an email. But I just know we've got one in California. So I'm not sure if the other organizations like ours in other states run election hotlines like we do.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much, Sam and Paul, for leading that discussion for all of us. I didn't see any questions come in through the chat, and I assume that's because, just like myself, that was very thorough, and I learned a lot. But if anyone else does have any follow-up questions from the ones that Sam already asked, now is your time to unmute or write in the chat if you have any questions for Paul specifically.
Paul, it's John. Can you put the hotline number in the chat, please?
Great idea,
Yes,
John.
we'll do.
I have a question.
Yes.
Could you comment on making sure that you drop your mail-in ballot to the correct or official mail-in ballot boxes?
Oh, okay. So there's look in most counties, it's the ballot drop-off box. In 3 counties in California, in LA, Orange County, and Fresno, one of the political parties has set up their own ballot drop-off boxes. You want to make sure that you're putting your ballot into an official ballot drop-off box. So if by chance you did put your ballot in one of those boxes, it seems like they're still turning them in and it's going to count. But to be on the safe side, you want to make sure you're putting your ballot in an official ballot drop-off box. So on your county elections website, they have maps of where these locations are, and they look different than the do-it-yourself drop boxes. So they're generally bigger. They're made of metal. They're like in Orange County, they're 4 times the size of one of the blue mailboxes. Like they're like a little mini dumpster tank. That's what an official ballot drop-off box looks like. So it's a really good question. It's only in a handful of counties, and there's a lot of stories about it in the news. So do I think the risk of you putting your ballot in those unofficial is pretty low, but it's something you want to watch out for. And probably the simplest way to do it is to just check on your county elections website where the ballot drop-off locations are and to go to one of those locations and to look for. So some of those unofficial boxes, we're calling themselves official boxes, but supposedly they're not going to do that anymore. So you're looking for official boxes. You're looking for the seal of the county government or the registrar of voters. And you can check out pictures online of what they look like. I don't want that to dissuade you from voting by mail. It's a lot in the news and it's frustrating, but I really don't want that to dissuade you from voting by mail if that's how you're going to choose to vote. You could always mail in with the Postal Service too. But that's a really good question. I hope that answered your question. It's frustrating and it makes it more confusing for voters. And state government's trying to address the issue, but it's like all things where lawyers get involved and are arguing, things take a while, especially if it goes to court. And, the election is, 13 or 14 days away, so it's close.
I have a statement and a question. Mm-hmm. So I actually have voted by mail already. Okay. I dropped it off at one of the vote by mail boxes, and the ones in my area, I noticed a lot of them were in front of county libraries, which is great. The turnaround time, I think I also did ballot tracks. So the turnaround time, I dropped it off on Monday. I got an email by Wednesday or Thursday. So it's really fast.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But my question is for people that are, before you drop everything off in the mail, what are the best nonpartisan websites to do your research on county officials or on any of the props that are on the ballots?
So I'll put them in the chat right now, but I'll tell you right now. So, and I have one on my desk here that I really like. So this is the Easy Voter Guide. Kind of looks like this. They've got a cool little people with masks. So this is made by the League of Women Voters. It's nonpartisan, so that means it doesn't favor one political party or the other. It doesn't tell you how to vote. It presents the information in an even and I think easy to follow format. So I really like the Easy Voter Guide is my favorite, and it's easyvoterguide.org. If the other thing, if you want to look up, is called Voter's Edge, which is the same information as this guide, but you put in your address, and it pulls up all the races that are going to be on your ballot. So where that's helpful, you're going to be voting for president, and you're going to be voting for Congress most likely. But the other smaller local races, you might not be sure if that's going to be on your ballot or not, because it really depends exactly where you live. So I think Voter's Edge is really useful because it helps you see exactly what's going to be on your ballot. You can look up information. And also, we didn't go over this presentation, but if you're going to go vote in person, you can bring cheat sheets. It's not school. You can bring a cheat sheet with you. You can bring the Easy Voter Guide. I'll typically bring some handwritten notes, especially if there's lots of propositions on. So you can do that. And the other advantage, at voting by mail at home is you can really take your time. If you want to look up one of the propositions or there's one you can't remember which way you want to vote, you can go back and check. But to answer your question, Connie, I really like the Easy Voter Guide. It's my favorite. There are some other resources out there, but I think theirs is pretty good and easy to use and user friendly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And what county are you in, Connie?
LA County.
Oh, cool.
But
so,
I work in Orange County, so I see a little bit of both. Yeah.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so you mailed it. Monday, and they confirmed they had it on Wednesday. That's good.
Yeah, and it's because LA County is so huge. That was actually pretty, like, that was really fast. I thought it was going to take a week or so.
Yeah, people are, and myself, are a little nervous about LA County elections. Just, in March, they had some issues with voter check-in, so they had really long lines.
Yeah.
It seems like they've addressed those problems, and they're sending all voters a vote by mail ballot for the first time, so that should fix it. But, kind of fingers crossed that LA goes well. The voting advocates, and I think the county's doing a good job trying to make sure things are going to go smoothly. But it's a stressful election, and it's been a very busy year for election officials because right from the March primary, we've been planning for an election in a pandemic all summer. So I'm feeling a little tired. I think everyone is.
Yeah. But I'm very glad they brought even in LA. I live in LA County, but a lot of my work is in Orange County. So I'm very well informed of everything that's happening in Orange County.
Yeah.
I think both counties are actually doing really, really great job compared to the rest of the United States, just like giving you all the information you need.
They do a pretty good job. And also, LA and Orange County themselves are bigger than a lot of states. They have more voters, it's more complicated, and they do a pretty good job with their education and outreach. Both LA and Orange County also have really good websites and materials online to help you make an informed decision. Also, I just want to say, Connie, for LA and Orange County and other counties that are doing what's called the Voters' Choice Act, where they're going to vote centers, they're required to get public input on the election planning process. So, you can occasionally write a letter, or you can go to a public hearing saying, I think a vote center should go here, not here, because this is not near a bus route that people with disabilities use. So I want you to know that there are some public input components to election planning. It's not really in play right now, that's kind of past, but I want everyone on the call to know that even counties that aren't doing the Voters' Choice Act, I think county election officials are receptive to the needs of people with disabilities. They just don't always know what needs to be improved, and if they know what it is, they're likely willing to do it. But it's being involved in the election planning process. And also, as Connie said, is to make sure, if you live in one county but you work in another, it can get kind of confusing. You'll hear different things. So luckily, LA and Orange County, their elections are pretty administered in a similar format. But if you live in San Diego County but you work in Imperial County, things are totally different when you go across the border. So it can be a little tough, especially if you live in Imperial County, your media comes out of San Diego, which is a lot bigger. So you won't really hear a lot about what's going on where you live. You hear the news from the big city that's a county away. And that happens a lot outside Sacramento. So those counties do elections differently than Sacramento County, but their news radiates out of Sacramento County. So it's just something else to be careful of when you're looking at things in the media, is to make sure that they're actually talking about where you live.
I had another question for Paul. Paul,
Sure.
what if a person with disability has bad writing? Can the city of San Francisco reject their ballot?
Did you say bad handwriting?
Yes.
They could reject your ballot if your signature is very different from the one they have on file. Mm-hmm. So, I really, the best advice I have is to look at your signature on your driver's license or state ID and try to make sure your signature looks like that. If they do reject it, you're going to get an opportunity to fix it. So they're going to mail you a letter, and they're also going to send you a notice through ballot tracks if you signed up for it. So there is a safety net there, but you could have your ballot rejected for bad handwriting. So you want to make sure that they're relatively similar. Again, they don't have to be an exact match. I have terrible handwriting personally, so it's just, you gotta, make sure it's somewhat similar.
Okay, does anyone else have any more questions for Paul? No? Okay, well, thank you again, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Sam. You both did an awesome job.
Thank you, everybody.
As Paul said, he was gonna drop some information in the chat. I ended up linking the Easy Voter Guide and the Voter's Edge Guide in the chat. Paul also put the hotline for the disabilities voting hotline for California in the chat as well. But I will be sure to send all of that information out in an email after this as well. And again, if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me. And thank you all for being here, and happy voting.
Thanks. And I can't turn on my video,
Thank you,
Samantha.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Samantha.
Thank you, everyone.
Samantha.
Be well.
I'm glad I could come.
Yes, thank you, Max, for coming.
Yeah, but my video has turned off.
Oh no.
I
Be
don't
safe,
know.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
I'll be
Bye.
on the Friday call.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, talk to you all later.
All right. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.